Imagine a medieval winter road. No lights, no maps, no human voices, only deep snow, wind screaming like blades, and a thick darkness swallowing every trace. In that world, leaving home after sunset was not carelessness. It was a sentence. Modern people believe time is just a number on a clock. But for medieval people, hours were the boundary between life and death. And they understood something we have forgotten. Winter does not need to strike immediately to kill you. It only needs time. We often imagine ancient travelers roaming day and night, bravely crossing forests and snowfields. The truth is far colder. In brutal winter, they dared to set out only when dawn had just touched the ground. Not because of superstition, not because of law, but because the human body, in darkness and cold, is a fragile machine ready to betray its own owner. Losing the path by a few hundred meters, slipping one wrong step, or stopping for too long, was enough for the cold to quietly take everything. Dawn did not bring only light. It brought the chance to correct mistakes, time to find the way, and a fragile hope of returning before night closed its doors again. So what made winter night the absolute enemy? Why did early light become an unspoken law of survival? And how many lives vanished simply because they traveled at the wrong hour? The answers will make you look at winter and at journeys themselves with a completely different eye. To understand why medieval people dared to leave their homes only when dawn had just begun to break, we must completely discard modern ways of thinking. Their winter was not simply cold. It was a hostile environment where nature offered no chance for correction. No weather forecasts, no rescue services, no guiding lights. A winter journey was not a voyage, but a survival trial. Stretching hour by hour, step by step. Miss one beat, and you paid with your life. A medieval road was not what we call a road today. It was only fragile paths etched into the earth, cutting through dense forests, crossing open fields, skirting marshes and barren hillsides. In summer, they were dangerous enough. In winter, snow erased every trace, turning the entire world into a meaningless white plain. Direction ceased to exist. You did not know where you were going, how far you had come, or how long it would take to reach shelter. Deviate by just a few degrees, and you could walk straight into deep forest, where light was never sufficient to find your way back. In that world, light was not a convenience. Light was life. By day, the sun gave you the ability to see the terrain, to recognize slopes, stream banks, familiar lines of trees. By day, you still had time to make mistakes and correct them. But at night, every mistake was final. Torches were blown out by strong winds after only a few minutes. Winter moonlight was weak, reflecting off snow just enough to blind you, not enough to guide you. Darkness drove the mind into panic, turning every small sound into a threat, every shadow into lurking danger. The human body was the most silent enemy on that journey. When you first began walking in the cold, you felt strong, still warm. But every step stole away a portion of your heat. Sweat began to seep beneath thick layers of clothing, and that was the deadly trap. Stop for only a few minutes, and that sweat froze, moisture pulling heat from the skin faster than any wind. Night was when temperatures dropped the lowest, when the cold did not roar but crept inward, numbing the hands, stiffening the joints, slowing thought. You did not realize you were growing weaker, and when you did, it was already too late. Dawn brought something more valuable than light. Time ahead. Setting out at first light, the traveler knew there was a full day to walk, to search for shelter, to stop before darkness returned. That time was the only lifeline. By contrast, leaving in the late afternoon meant cutting your own chances of survival short. You might manage a few hours, but when the sun set, everything collapsed at once. No road, no direction, no safe place to stop. Winter carried another enemy as well: water. Frozen rivers and streams looked solid, but a thin layer of ice was enough to deceive the exhausted. By day, light helped you distinguish thick ice from flowing water beneath. By night, everything looked the same. One misstep into icy water, and the body lost heat within minutes. There was no time to climb out, no strength to keep moving. The outcome was decided in silence. That is why waiting for dawn was not a habit. It was a rule learned from bodies left behind on white snow roads. Medieval people learned to read winter through their own bodies, through fear and memory passed down across generations. They understood that the sun did not only illuminate the road, it kept humans alert, warm, and hopeful. When the sun rose, the world opened. When it set, the world closed like an iron door. And that was only the surface of the story. Because when the light disappeared, it was not only the cold that waited. Other dangers, more ruthless, began to rise, layer by layer, like a trap laid in advance for anyone who dared to challenge the winter night. When the darkness of winter fell, the cold did not rush in like a mad killer. It acted slowly, deliberately, and far more ruthlessly. At first, the body only shivered slightly. Fingers went numb, joints stiffened, breathing grew heavier. But it was precisely then that people often made the deadliest mistake, underestimating the earliest signs. The traveler believed he could still walk, still had enough strength. Meanwhile, core body temperature had already begun to drop, dragging the mind into slower and slower rhythms. The cold did not only steal warmth, it stole the ability to judge. When the hands lost feeling, you dropped your belongings. When the legs stiffened, movement became clumsy. A slight slip on ice, a fall that seemed harmless, was enough to force you to stop. And stopping in a winter night was the most dangerous moment. A motionless body lost heat many times faster. The traveler grew foggy, drowsy. Sleep in that cold was not rest, but a door closing forever. But the cold was only the first layer of danger. When light vanished, humans were no longer in the position of travelers. They became prey. The winter forest was terrifyingly silent, and that silence concealed predators on the move. Wolves, feral dogs, even starving bands of raiders understood what travelers did not want to admit. At night, humans were weaker than any creature accustomed to the dark. You heard sounds but could not judge distance. Your heart raced in fear, and each pounding beat consumed another fragment of your remaining heat. The next climax did not come from anything tangible, but from time itself. In the night, you no longer sensed how long you had been walking. 10 minutes or an hour felt the same. There were no markers to measure by, no light to estimate distance. The traveler easily fell into the illusion that just a little farther would be enough to arrive. But a little farther in a winter night could stretch on until the body was completely drained. By then, turning back was no longer an option, because you no longer knew where you had come from. Then came water and ice, the final trap waiting beneath the white snow. By day, you could see streams, thin ice, damp ground. By night, everything blended into one. One misstep, and the body plunged into freezing water. Heat was stripped away in a matter of seconds, muscles seized, breath was crushed from the lungs. Even if you managed to crawl back onto the bank, soaked clothing would turn you into a moving block of ice. There was no way to recover. The greatest climax, and the most terrifying one, lay inside the human being. Panic. When cold, hunger, and exhaustion struck at the same time, the mind began to betray itself. Irrational decisions appeared, turning into deep forest to escape the wind, abandoning gear to feel lighter, sitting down to rest for just a moment. Each of these choices sounded reasonable in the instant, yet pushed the traveler closer to death. A winter night did not require many mistakes, just one. Because of this chain of dangers layered upon each other, medieval people understood that darkness offered no second chances. They passed down a simple but brutal rule. If you could not reach shelter before nightfall, turn back while you still could. Waiting for dawn was not slowness. It was the wisest action to avoid stepping into this inescapable chain of climaxes. If you are listening to this story, ask yourself one question. In that situation, what would you do? Would you risk pressing on into the winter night, or would you wait for the light to return? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the answers to old survival questions reflect very clearly how we face difficult choices today. At this point, many people will think that medieval people were simply afraid, that they were weak before nature and therefore shrank back, waiting for the sun to rise before daring to move. But that is a mistaken view. The twist of the story lies in the complete opposite. Medieval people were not passive in the face of winter. They were keen observers and brutally practical. Traveling only at dawn was not an instinctive reaction, but a conclusion drawn from centuries paid for with human lives. Dawn, in that world, was not a convenient moment. It was the only optimal window. The air was still cold, but the cold had stabilized. The wind had not yet strengthened. Night snow had hardened, forming a firmer surface to walk on. It was when feet sank the least and energy was consumed the least. By contrast, at midday, the sun softened the snow, turning the road into slush and icy water. Each step became twice as heavy, footwear soaked through, and when evening fell, all that moisture instantly became a death sentence. Medieval people understood this very clearly, even though they had no modern scientific concepts to name it. What they possessed was survival experience. They knew that setting out too early, while it was still dark, meant pushing themselves straight into the night. But setting out too late meant cutting short their safe time. Dawn gave them a full day ahead, long enough to make small mistakes and still correct them. That was the difference between a reckless journey and one with a chance of return. What is even more astonishing is how they measured time. No clocks, no precise calendars. Their time was measured by the position of the sun, the length of shadows, the feeling of cold on the skin. When a tree's shadow reached a certain length, they knew they had to seek shelter. When the light changed color, they knew the door of safety was about to close. Time was not something to be spent. It was the most precious resource of all, more valuable than food or strength. The response of the story lies here. Medieval people were not victims of nature. They were those who knew how to compromise intelligently with it. They did not try to conquer winter, nor did they challenge the darkness. They chose to survive by listening to the unspoken rules of the world around them. Dawn, to them, was not just the first light of the day. It was the signal that allowed life to continue. Looking back, we realize that the decision to wait for the sun to rise was not lacking in courage. On the contrary, it required a different kind of bravery, the courage of patience, the courage to stop when instinct urges you to press on, the courage to wait in the cold instead of rushing into the darkness just to prove something. That was survival wisdom in its purest form, unadorned, unromantic, yet strong enough to carry human beings through the longest and most brutal winters. Looking back at this story from the modern world, it is easy to smile and think that we have far surpassed our ancestors. We have streetlights, digital maps, heating systems, and emergency call buttons just a tap away. We move regardless of day or night, regardless of season, with the belief that technology will always be on our side. Yet precisely because of this, we often forget a fundamental truth. Human beings still carry the same fragile bodies as they did thousands of years ago. Cold, darkness, and exhaustion still act upon us according to rules that have not changed at all. Medieval people did not possess the privilege of convenience, but they had something we are steadily losing: the ability to listen to the world around them and to listen to their own bodies. They understood that moving fast was not always wise, that pushing forward was not always brave. In winter, choosing the right moment mattered more than any other skill. Waiting for dawn was not delay. It was a conscious decision to preserve life. That lesson does not belong only to snow-covered medieval roads. It reflects clearly into life today. There are moments when darkness descends, not because we are weak, but because conditions do not yet allow us to move forward safely. There are journeys where forcing ourselves onward, while vision is blurred and energy is depleted, will exact a far greater price than stopping, breathing deeply, and waiting for the light to return. Dawn in this story is not only the sun on the horizon. It is hope. It is the right timing. It is clarity. Medieval people survived not through strength or recklessness, but by understanding their own limits and respecting forces greater than themselves. They did not fight winter. They learned how to exist within it. And it was that humility that allowed them to keep going from one winter to the next. In a world that constantly urges us to be faster, stronger, more decisive, this old story reminds us that sometimes wisdom lies in knowing how to wait. If you place yourself in the position of a traveler of that time, standing before a snow-white road as night approaches, what would you do? Would you risk pressing on, or would you turn back and wait for dawn? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every answer reflects how we face difficult decisions in modern life. And if you enjoy stories that strip history bare, survival lessons paid for by entire eras, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the journeys ahead. Sometimes to go farther. The bravest thing to do is to wait for the sun to rise.